Action.
Action.
Well done. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to experiment with some watercolour techniques first. And what you can see here, I've done 4 different techniques. So before you actually get to paint your monster, you need to have a practice at these techniques. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to divide my page into 4 sections and I'm going to write the names on here. So I've got wet on wet, wet on dry, dry brush, and dry on wet. And you guys can do this straight in your visual art diary. So when we have our watercolour, what we're going to be using is we're going to be using a big brush like this and a small rounded brush as well. Okay, so they're separated, and when you go to get them, you're going to want to get yourself one of those and one of these. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is wet on wet. So I'm going to take my water, oops, I won't put that in front of there, and I'm going to use this is maroon colour. I was looking at what was that, and I'm going to put a lot of water on my watercolour so you can see how wet that is. Yeah, so it's really wet, the watercolour. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to paint on this page here. Now wherever I put my water, my paint will stay in that spot. So now I've got wet watercolour in wet paint, and you can see the beautiful effect that you can get. Now the beauty of watercolour is that it has this type of effect, yeah? So it's not like acrylic paint where you want a solid colour. You want to get that really beautiful motley effect where you've got dark in some edges and it's lighter in others, yeah? That's the beauty of watercolour. That's the beauty of watercolour.
That's the beauty of watercolour.
Bet you didn't know there was so much excitement with watercolour. The next one is wet on dry. So as the name suggests, we've got a lot of water in our watercolour palette, and I'm going to go into dry paper. And you can see that it's beautiful. The effect is slightly different and gives you a different amount of control as well. Now, one thing that I'm going to tell you is when you're actually doing your watercolours, don't go over and over and over and over and over the page like this, because what happens is your page starts to peel and the fibres will fall off and you'll put a hole in your page, yeah? So what you want to do is you put your water down really quickly and then you put your paint on top. So when you're doing large sections, I would recommend one of those 2 techniques, okay? Now, dry brush, as the name suggests, you will get 1 piece of paper towel each and you will blot your paper towel. And what we're going to do is we're going to come into the colour. Now, you can see there's hardly any water left on that. And what I want to do is I want to get as much water out of my brush as possible, and then I'm going to go onto my paper. I've still got too much water.
That's my favorite.
But you can see how intense the colour is. And now you can see what I'm getting is I'm getting the texture of the brush. So what I'm trying to do is get texture here. So if you want a textured monster.
That'd be good for an eye.
An eye, or maybe fur?
Yeah.
Or a furry tail? Yeah? The final one is dry on wet. So I'm going to put a little bit of colour in. Let me just do that. And then I'm going to dry my brush off again. And this, you can kind of get really cool, almost like a spray paint graffiti effect. So dry my brush off, come in with a dry brush.
Well.
And you kind of get really nice edges on it. Okay? Cut, thanks, Jake.